Dirk Hannema died at the age of 88 on the 11th of June 1984. With his passing, the Dutch art world lost one of its most prominent and controversial figures. Hannema became a keen collector at a young age. His private collection of more than 3,500 artworks now forms the basis of Museum de Fundatie.
I always looked for contrasts, but every object had to be good, had to have personality.
Dirk Hannema was born in 1896 into a privileged home in Batavia, now Jakarta. On his 5th birthday, the Hannema family moved to The Hague. Dirk's father, Dirk Hannema Sr., was a rich property agent. His mother, Hannema-de Stuers, was descendant from an aristocratic family of true art lovers. Together with the young Dirk, she took private lessons with the famous art educator H.P. Bremer. Dirk took the initiative to buy his first artwork on his 14th birthday.
Later it turned out to be a little painting by Jonkind. This is it here. It was terribly dirty, black, grey, brown. With some cleaning, the signature of Jonkind also appeared. It was bought for 40 guilders. I was at grammar school at the time, and it was a lot of money for me to come up with then.
Hannema had a good eye for art. It was therefore natural that he would study art history. During his studies, he became an academic assistant at Museum Boymans in Rotterdam. Less than a year later, he was made the director. Hannema was barely 26 years old. At that time, Museum Boymans was still housed in the Schielandshuis, an old-fashioned museum with a regional collection. But Hannema was ambitious. For him, Museum Boymans had to become a museum with a premium international collection. Hannema piqued the enthusiasm of a number of rich Rotterdam port magnates to contribute towards a new collection. He traveled half the world and returned with famous old masters. The Schielandshuis quickly became too small for all these works. At the end of the 1920s, Hannema therefore made ambitious plans for an ultra-modern museum of international standing. The new museum was officially opened on the 6th of July 1935. Hannema, not yet 40 years old, was a celebrated man. With a keen eye for quality, he expanded Museum Boymans' collection to include first-class pieces, both old and modern, by artists ranging from Hieronymus Bosch and Rembrandt to Picasso and Kandinsky. In 1937, an unknown painting turned up in Paris. Like other museum directors, Hannema was convinced that the painting was by the 17th century master Johannes Vermeer. He snapped the painting up right under the nose of the Rijksmuseum for a record sum. The supper at Emmaüs became the highlight of Museum Boymans. And then came the war. The Netherlands was occupied and Hannema remained director of the museum. In 1942, the head of the Dutch National Socialist Party, Anton Mussert, asked Hannema to become supervisor of the Dutch museums. He agreed. Following the liberation, Hannema was accused of treason and collaboration. He was imprisoned for 8 months. For the rest of his life, Hannema maintained that he collaborated with the Germans to ensure that the Netherlands held onto its art collection. He was acquitted, but he could no longer continue as director of Museum Boymans. Hannema's reputation was severely damaged. Shortly afterwards, his good standing as an art expert was also called into question. His supper at Emmaüs came to be embroiled in the biggest case of art fraud in the history of the Netherlands.
Legal proceedings will be conducted at the Amsterdam District Court, in which the whole world has an interest. The case against the artist Han van Meegeren. The notorious paintings, produced so cleverly by Van Meegeren in the style of famous old masters that the world was in no doubt about their authenticity and paid enormous sums for the forgeries, were brought to the court in a removal van the day before. The Last Supper, one of the paintings with the signature Vermeer. Just like the Supper at Emmaüs, which was sold to Museum Boymans for 1,25 million guilders.
I was involved in this case until 1945, for as long as I was director of Boymans. But beyond that, I was not involved. The painting was in public on display at Boymans for 1.5 years afterwards, and not one comment was ever made about it then.
Hannema continued to believe firmly in the authenticity of the Supper at Emmaüs until his death. He was more or less the only one. Hannema, unmarried and childless, withdrew to Overijssel and, at the end of the 1950s, arrived at Het Nijenhuis castle between Heino and Weijen. He now concentrated entirely on collecting art, and did so in his characteristic obstinate way.
It is certainly a passion that you have to have from an early age, otherwise it doesn't work. At least not when it comes to collecting. You can write fine books about art, but that's not what it's about. It's about discovering, seeing, experiencing the actual value of each work of art. It doesn't matter whether it's old or modern.
In 1957, Hannema created the Hannema-de Stuers Fundatie for his art collection, named Art with Parents. By doing this, Hannema wanted to preserve his collection. In exchange for living at Het Nijenhuis castle, he opened his collection to the public. Right up to the end of his life, Hannema continued to bring together an intriguing art collection of high quality. His own fascination remained his only criterion.
Heel karakteristiek voor die tijd. Men kan dat dateren ongeveer 1657.
Dirk Hannema was indefatigable when it came to talking about art. He took his visitors on tours around the castle himself, showing them his cherished artworks.
I certainly could not live without art. If I feel miserable and see a good painting, it cheers me up again immediately. And if I'm tired when abroad, for example, I go to a museum and likewise my tiredness disappears.